You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. We have quite a packed show for you. In fact, I'd say it's more stuffed than I was the last time I went to a bathhouse. So I will try and make this introduction as brief as possible. Very quickly, before I tell you what is in store for you, I'd like to announce that as of May 1st, we are again offering Cemetery Confession shirts, and not any Cemetery Confession shirts. It is a brand new design, and this design has been created by the one and only Ryan Flint of the band Witchhands, and also the goth shop in Colorado, the Arbitrarium. It's a gorgeous design. If you'd like to see it, there will be a link in the show notes. So go ahead and take a look if you're on YouTube or on your podcast app or Spotify or whatever. It should be the first link in your notes. I'll have more information about that at the end of the show. If you want to support the show, go check that out. To start off today's episode, we're going to be chatting with Chris Cantor of Procession Magazine. This is a print magazine that is, speaking of things, stuffed to the gills with interviews with musicians in our scene. The most recent issue as of this recording features interviews with Golden Apes, Christian Death, Black Rose Burning, Crew Lies, Mesh, She Passed Away, Sean Templar, and a bunch more, just as an example. We're going to be chatting about the history and relevance of magazines as a medium and micromedia as a whole, as well as compilations, waxing poetic about music and the impact and relevance and importance of music within the scene, along with stories about how goth scenes and bands and music have impacted our own lives. After that, we're going to be reviewing the new album from Har Belex. We've got Sinister Suggestions, where we will be quick-fire reviewing a cacophony of new releases that came out in the last month, singles, albums, EPs. So you'll have lots of bands to dig into and listen to for the next month. And then after that, we've got a very special surprise for you, which comes in the form of an audio drama performed both by a special guest and Trey. And it is going to be in keeping with the theme of sort of a celebration and love letter to the history and importance of magazines within the goth community and the role that they've played in supporting and proliferating our community and our culture. So I'm really excited to get to this episode and share all of this with you. As always, I am Danny Ashes, your host. I'm here with Trey and Chris Cantor of Procession. Chris, can you share with us the story of how you were first introduced to goth and why that has been important to you, why that's stayed with you over time?
Ooh. Well, first, thank you guys for having me. I'm just so appreciative.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Yeah, our pleasure.
No, I will answer that question, but I really just wanted off the top to just say that your podcast has been a complete inspiration for me. And this is kind of a lifetime achievement award to be able to sit here and talk with you guys.
Wow.
And I'm dead serious. I know I'm going to come back to my origin story on goth, but I will say the episode you had on Fred Berger and Propaganda Magazine was really an inspiration to starting the crazy project that I started, Procession Magazine. And I will say Procession Magazine probably wouldn't have happened if you guys hadn't interviewed Fred a few years ago. And I kind of took that and said, wow, well, if he can do it, I can do it too. Probably not as good, but I'm still trying. So.
That is incredibly sweet of you. I don't. Wow, that's thank from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for that. That's very very kind of you.
Now we're just gonna get into like one of those horses like appreciation.
So, yeah, circle jerk.
But anyway, yeah. I mean, goth. I don't really have a unique origin story. I grew up. I'm in the '90s, early '90s, so I kind of came into all this stuff when it was very ubiquitous. You know, Ministry was on MTV. Skinny Puppy was cool. It was right before grunge broke, if you will. So there was a lot of alternative music. Nine Inch Nails, obviously, big. So it was a lot more ubiquitous than it is now. So it was, but it wasn't mainstream by any stretch of the imagination. But I started with industrial music, very, very big into industrial music. Used to go to the old 930 here in DC and see, Chem Lab and Hate Department and 16 Volt and Cop Shoot Cop. Just to name drop a few.
Yeah.
And then I think probably the gateway was either Cleopatra or Sisters of Mercy. I kind of discovered both of those around the same time. And, it wasn't industrial music with a capital I, but it was just adjacent enough. It was dark and it was gloomy and it was pseudo electronic and it was just cool. So I think that kind of started me down the rabbit hole of, really getting into goth music. And then, from there, it was a series of compilations, in goth days, goth rock compilation, the ones we all had kind of kicking around. And then little by little, you kind of start to tease your hair out and do then you have the long black cape, and before you know it, you look like Brandon Lee from The Crow.
I used to have, I miss it dearly, but I had a crushed velvet cape that was black on the outside and red on the inside.
Yeah.
Good times. Well, so then I would also love to hear how Procession kind of got off the ground and how that worked. But then also, was that your first sort of in-scene project, or had you worked on other projects like that in the scene?
God, no. This is my first crazy project, quote unquote, in the scene. I mean, one thing and this does get to the kind of origin story, is I'm just a huge fan of this stuff. Like I mean, anybody who kind of interacts with me behind the scenes, I am just the biggest, fan or of all this stuff. Like, I got to talk to the people from Pretentious Moi, and that just blew my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
That was like my like crowning achievement of the fact that a bunch of British guys got on a call with me and we just got to talk about goth music for like an hour. So it's just pure unadulterated fandom that kind of goes into this. As the reason I started it specifically was this was basically a COVID sanity project where I kind of got sick of staring at a screen and the news at the time, and it was just like I need something just to get away from it all. So again, to go back, I am dead serious. I your podcast here, especially the interview with Fred, about how he was talking about just going to clubs and photographing specimen and photographing people in clubs, and that really stuck with me, just the DIY-ness of it. And that kind of was like the seed, and I thought, oh, that's really cool that he just picked up and did a magazine. And I think during COVID I got really frustrated because right before COVID, I had started going out a lot, kind of getting back into things. I went to a lot of really good shows, Clan of Zymox, Drab Majesty, the Neural Farm here in DC. And I was really felt like I was kind of getting on a roll, like, things back. This is really cool. And then all of a sudden it stopped.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah.
Bad timing right there. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like kind of that pent up frustration of there's all this great music out there and there's no way to kind of not talk about it, but kind of memorialize it. And that's kind of the other point, I think, too, is that there's just so much good music out there now. And, it's been it kind of picked up, mid teens, 2000 teens, if you will.
Yeah.
And, I got really, really excited about it, especially like Cold Transmission really just like brought me back into things in a really exciting way. And one of the things that I found was really cool was that a lot of the bands that I started listening to were local, at least local to the DC area. And that was something I wasn't used to. Like band like Scissor Jicks, Kiss of the Whip, some of the ones that I kind of tackled early on. And, I'm used to listening to all these European bands that you'll never see. They're just some obscure name that then they make really cool music, but they're from some small town in Germany, and you don't really have access to them. So I think part of the impetus too was that there were some really, really great bands. Locally I use proverbially, but there were a lot of bands that I had. You could go down the street and see Scissor Jicks, or and Kiss of the Whip was in Baltimore, and that kind of was the kind of inception of it, was that just to celebrate some like local talent, if you will, that I thought was really cool. But it kind of grew really fast from there, and that's really just a credit for all the artists and everybody who kind of jumped in. I think Caroline Blind basically said that it's kind of like Stone Soup, where you bring the pot and the stones, and then everybody starts putting in different ingredients, and suddenly you have a soup. And I feel like that, as a credit to everybody, that's kind of how it grew, and continues to grow. And it really is, I can't emphasize it enough, just a passion project, because I love this stuff. And as you can see, I can talk about it for hours.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's the same way with basically anything in the scene. I mean, it's Cemetery Confessions even. I don't, I do a lot of the work, but the show doesn't exist without everyone who contributes to it. It really is, all of this, everything we have exists because people come together as a community, right? So it really is always a group effort.
Yeah.
I did want to say that Procession is such a fantastic word for a goth magazine.
Yeah.
It's like right up there with dirge or lugubrious or something. Yeah. It's much cooler than lugubrious, but I wanted to ask how you settled on Procession as a name.
I got lucky, man. I got really lucky. Okay. Obviously the P's is purposeful. Then maybe the next magazine will be called Purposeful, but obviously big fan of Propaganda. And then Permission magazine, I would be suffice to leave out as kind of one of my favorite magazine from the 90s. That was kind of like an alternative to Propaganda, but I thought it was excellent too, and it covered a lot of the very cool goth bands. So those were the kind of two starting points. In fact, I ended up, for issue 1, I ended up going into my parents' attic, literally climbed in this like little hole, and found a bunch of my old magazines that have been sitting in a box up there from the 90s. Wow. And brought them all down and kind of just looked through them and said, okay, here's what they did on page 5. Here's what they did on page 8. So it's very, very purposeful. I think it's grown exponentially from there, but that was kind of the inception. So Procession, you know, I'll since you guys get the scoop on it, I was looking for kind of songs for inspiration for the name, and I think originally I thought Dark Angel would be a cool name for a magazine. And it's apparently there was a magazine in the 90s called Dark Angel. So there's another band that has a really cool song called Procession, who also has a song called Dark Angel. So that was kind of the association there. But I do think, you know, once you hit it, you're like, yeah, that's it. That's got to be that's got to be it. So it's luck, complete luck.
I mean, I like that symmetry though too, that it came from a song, because I mean, Procession is really hyper focused on music, which is I think kind of sets it apart in a lot of ways. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there have been, but a lot of other goth magazines focus either on fashion primarily, or they do the shotgun approach where it's, you know, lifestyle, music, fashion, literature, music from outside the scene, makeup, a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, but they definitely lean heavily on the visual medium, which works for a magazine, but it does leave some niches out of coverage.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
That's just, again, dumb luck. Not dumb luck, but more stupidity, I think. Mostly because that's the only thing that I not know how to do, but that I just adore it. And my real problem, and the problem we all have, is we can't get enough bands in the magazine. Like I really wish I could put twice as many in each at magazine, and we're constantly thinking of ways to do it. But it's really just that I love this music. Like I eat, sleep, and breathe it all, and I know there's other people who do it too, so I'm not weird. Okay.
Well, I mean, what is it? I don't know if you can put this into words, but why is music so important to you? Is that linked to the goth scene, or is it like, is there something just in your life overall? Like, why is that? What does that mean to you? What does music mean to you?
It's definitely, like, I love the scene too. I think it's so magical, and it just feels correct, if you will. It's cool as shit. Like, it is like, I was at Dark Side of the Con a few weeks ago, and you know, it is, you got to step back at some point, and like, we're at a hotel in New Jersey, we're in a conference room dancing to oomps music at 1 in the afternoon. But I'm also like, man, it doesn't get any better than this. Like, you know, it's just, it's great, man. It's fun. I think anybody in the scene recognizes how special it is. And the music's awesome. Like, I it's just what I listen to, basically. I don't want to be too hyperbolic and say it's who I am, because I do a lot of other stuff that doesn't involve the scene, equally as nerdy.
Sure. Of course.
But it's just always, it just brings me joy. I'll just say that it just really, really brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah. So I mean, I have my own thoughts on this that I can share, but I have to ask you, because inevitably this question is going to come up, but what makes print magazines important and valuable in the modern era from your perspective?
That's a good question, and it's actually something I've never really thought too much about. So I don't know if I have a
fair enough,
dynamite answer. I mean, the real primary reason I'm started a print magazine is because I'm old school, and everybody who knows me knows I am terrible at social media. Even the people who try to contact me over social media know I am just and again, in real life I do very highly technical things. It's just that there's a permanence, I think, to print magazine that the internet, or it doesn't have. for better or for worse. Like I'm not trying to denigrate anything, but I do think there's a permanence to print that is really cool. I also think it's relaxing in a way. Again, when I started this, my whole thought was I just need something to read under a tree to get away from Donald Trump. Like, that was it. I was like, I don't want to hear about motherfucking Donald Trump anymore or whatever else. I just want to go and sit in the park and read a magazine and not worry about things. And I think you can get that with a print magazine a little better than you could with the internet.
You can
absolutely swear, by the way. It's totally fine.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
You definitely can, because it's something you can focus on. You can't switch to another tab. You can't open a different app. You've just got this magazine. It is the sum total of your focus at this moment, that it does help you really kind of get more from the information you're absorbing, because you're just not being distracted by notifications and dings and whatever happens on your phone.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. And again, there, each medium has its advantages, but I think there's a soothing quality to to a print magazine.
I also think, as much as we live in a world with access to everything, there's something about, for me at least, reading the thoughts of people from different places in the country or different places in the world in a curated format that's divorced from my own social circle, that feels really special. Because, even though we do have access to everything we see is still kind of generated in an algorithm somehow. So it's not really removed from us in a lot of ways. So there's something about print magazines that feels like it exists beyond ourselves, but is still, because it's in our niche, it's still connected to our community, which for me, when I read magazines, it brings back that magic of first getting into goth. And like you said, there's that permanence to it. There's the format exists long after the publication ends. So I can read an issue of Drop Dead magazine for the first time long after it's stopped printing, and it feels like I'm dusting off this atavistic tome of forgotten history, like I'm Gandalf or some wizened occultist, right?
You shall not goth.
And I honestly, I don't know. I was kind of surprised that of all subcultures, goth kind of let physical media die, whether that was magazines or vinyl or CDs. Maybe that has more just to do with the ebb and flow of how many people are actually in the community. So you can't support physical media if there aren't enough bodies. But I mean, it really lends itself to the romantic and nostalgic and the ritualistic leanings of goth as a culture. So
I mean, it's pure economics. I can tell you that for a fact. And distribution and all those fun stuff you got to think about when you have a print medium. And the scene does ebb and flow, which is why the magazine came into form, is because I do think there has been an amazing upswing in the late teens with just so much cool stuff. So and to give credit, there are other magazines out there, some excellent ones too. But I think a lot of it is just the kind of zeitgeist of the moment, that I think there's just a lot of interest in the scene, at least from what I've seen, which I think is really, really cool.
Yeah. No, to that point, I think I've seen a lot of Gen Z talking about stuff like print magazines and vinyl. And I think they might be driving the resurgence as well, where I think maybe a lot of us older folks kind of jumped on the digital train with like Napster and webzines and alt gothic and stuff like that. But maybe too now, considering how a lot of people view social media as pernicious in a lot of ways, that and then also maybe the penchant for just generally appreciating art in the goth scene.
Yeah.
I think Gen Z that are now getting into goth are really drawn to that physical media. So for those of us who always liked physical media, we get to kind of jump on that train, which is cool.
I've definitely been seeing a resurgent of the value of the artifact rather than just the content. It's about an actual artifact, and that seems to be more highly valued by, like you said, especially Gen Z and some of those people who grew up maybe without, most of their media was digital from day one. And now they're like, oh, we can actually have a thing.
Yeah.
What's old is new, man.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, let me ask you this too, then. You mentioned listening to Fred, but do you have stories about goth magazines being important in your life, or how did that impact you personally?
I mean, I'm certainly not unique in this matter, but that was it. Especially from about 1992 to 2000, that and the Cleopatra Records catalog were just the two things you had to get information about the scene, basically. Even until 2000, there was no internet. I do know there was alt gothic, and I was a member, and we had our little group, and I had a t-shirt.
Yeah.
And and there definitely was online stuff, but it wasn't like you could type in Switchblade Symphony and you would get a whole long history of the band and who was in it and stuff. I remember I downloaded a picture of Switchblade Symphony off of AOL, and that was my first idea of what they looked like. And I remember it like literally line by line downloading and like
put it on a floppy and take it to your friend's house.
Because the Switchblade Symphony, just to kind of go back to it, they had an amazing track on this In Goth Days compilation, and it was just blew my mind. Like, I think it blew everybody's mind of what this song is. It was bad trash, and you just had no idea who this band was. They were on this compilation. They have one song. You couldn't find anything else about them. And, that's kind of where the magazines would come in, was you could get a magazine and there would be an article on Love is Colder Than Death, or Chem Lab, or, Skinny Puppy even. I remember they always had a really cool feature. I think it was an Industrial Nation, where they would just go and give you where all the samples came from and Skinny Puppy songs.
Yeah, I've seen some of those. Awesome. Those are fun. Those are a lot of fun.
And they would like Jesus Wept, Hellraiser,
Hellraiser, Blade Runner.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it was like all. Yeah, if it were Frontline Assembly, it would just all be Blade Runner.
Yeah.
But those were the things that were cool, but you just you would never you didn't have the instant access to it now, where I could be like, hey, what's that sample from?
Yeah.
This random song, and then you type it in and you get it back. So that's kind of the void that I think that the magazines filled back in the day. Do we need that today? No, but at least with Procession Magazine, I think my hope is that it just allows people to kind of connect with the artists.
Yeah, for sure.
You kind of need it again now, because we have the opposite problem. Before, there was just a paucity because there wasn't really an internet, so there wasn't anything. But now there's too much internet. Yeah. And so trying to find the wheat, try to separate the wheat from the chaff is really hard if you're just jumping in Google search or searching in Spotify or Reddit or whatever to find information. You're just flooded with stuff. We're finding, like Danny said, a curated view of things by a person is almost even more invaluable now with the overload of information that we have.
Oh, I can't agree more on that. Like, I miss compilations. I really, and I know they have them on Bandcamp, and I download them all the time, and I appreciate the shit out of those. Oops. But
it's fine. It's fine.
Sorry.
Stop fucking swearing, you asshole.
You're good. Yeah.
All right. Yes, I'm speaking the Queen's English here. But no, I mean, compilations for me were just so special because that's how you found out about new bands, and you'd get one and you'd have 4 good tracks and 6 bad ones.
Yeah.
But, that would lead you on this wild goose chase where you had to go out and, who's this Portuguese, Fields of Nephilim ripoff. Oh, I got to get that song. And then I got to get an import from this X Marks the Pedwalk side project from Germany, and I paid $25 for it, and it sucks. And
the good old days.
Yeah, so you take the good and the bad.
Yeah.
But I do think that curation is good, and I will say, just not to ramble on a little too much here, but I even find with the magazine that I discover a lot of cool stuff just by interacting with it, and a lot of what I'm kind of sharing is just stuff that kind of I find and I'm like, wow, I've never heard of this before, and I think it's really cool. A little spoiler, I really am against spoilers, but there's a band which I'm really excited about. It's called Black Heroin Gallery.
Yeah, I know them.
Oh, you know them?
Well, I know who the band is. I don't actually know them personally.
Oh, okay. No, okay. But no, to be honest with you, I had no idea who this band was.
Oh, okay.
And they contacted me, and were like, hey, here's our stuff. And I listened to it because I try to listen to everything, and it blew me away. And I was like, this is amazing death rock. Like, it is so good. I am just so kind of in love with it. And so the spoiler alert, we did an interview, and halfway through it just drops, oh yeah, I was in the Astro Vamps. And my jaw dropped, and I was like, oh my god,
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
So that was one of those,
wow,
one of my favorite bands from back in the early 90s, and then it's just those little connections that you get. You're like, oh my god, this is bigger than I thought it was.
And I mean, you like that's major. I don't know how. I think it's still pretty prevalent, but at least for me, the sort of goth points you get from knowing that obscure trivia is like, you don't get that on the internet. You only get that from stuff like, reading Procession Magazine and that kind of thing. So I do want to talk about compilations in a minute here, but if you don't mind indulging me sharing some stories about why magazines were important to me, because they were. So like when I was younger, again, in the probably this was around the early 2000s, I remember people would bring magazines to house parties.
Oh, wow.
Or they would bring them to there was a music fest I used to go to that had a goth tent, and it was for a week, and people would come from mostly the Midwest, but people would bring their own personal collections of magazines. So like the ones I remember mostly were like Industrial Nation, Orcus, Carpe Noctem. There was a magazine that was all in Japanese.
Oh, wow.
And then people would bring in like Extra X in Germany. They had clothing catalogs that sometimes had a band interview or two in there. People would bring those. And so these were basically like, personal prized possessions,
right? But
they would just bring them and leave them out on tables as like part of a community resource, because you, like you said, you didn't really have access to the internet in the way you do now. So you could get stories from goths in bigger cities, or read about concerts, or get relationship advice, or information about festivals, or makeup tips, or hear about new bands, find ways to style your outfits and that kind of thing. And so, like, for example, I learned about one of my favorite video games of all time is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. And the first time I heard about that was a piece that somebody did in a magazine. So, but like, so that was a really cool community thing. Yeah. And it's also, they can function, I think, as local scene support as well. Mm-hmm. So there's a local, well, actually, what brought me to this was, I was speaking of video games. I was reading an interview with a video game developer who was talking about punk and DIY scenes as proto internet exchanges of like esoteric kind of knowledge. And I wrote down this quote because he said, I think people are exhausted by the alienation and dematerialization of the internet. Yeah. And what that made me think of was this local zine in Chicago called Kilter, which is run by some friends since 2008, which, it focuses on local stuff. So it's all, all the food reviews or concert reviews, comics, poetry, whatever's in there. If it's talking about wax tracks or whatever, it's to support the local scene. And the reason that made me think of the sort of DIY thing is because to buy the magazine, you go to a club event or you go to a concert and you meet up with Jennifer and you buy the magazine from her. Oh, cool. So you're already out, you're supporting a band, you're supporting a DJ, you're mingling and talking to other people in the scene. So the act of getting the magazine is reinforcing the community. Yeah. And I'm sure that's not unique to Chicago. Like, I know, for example, if we talk about the 80s, when we reviewed when we read the book Italian Goth, when it was talking about the 80s Italian Goth scene in Milan, they talked about the importance of zines in the local scene for concerts and squats and that kind of thing. And I'm sure all the major cities have a local thing like that.
No, I don't think anymore.
Not anymore. Oh,
yeah, well. I mean, spoiler alert, if you do find me in a club, I will give you as many Procession magazines as you want. And I won't charge you for it.
Just how many pockets do you have? Holy shit.
Exactly. Take them off my hands. I don't want to carry these anymore. It is funny. Yeah, I was out on Saturday night and I had a huge backpack full of magazines, but I was tired. Wow. And I schlepped them all back to my car because I didn't want to carry him anymore. And of course, as soon as I got back to the club, a guy, Paul from Social Station, shout out, comes up and says, "Oh, I want to copy the magazine." I was like, "Dude, I just took him back to my car, man." So
maybe next time, buddy.
I'm gonna drop. Yeah, no, I'll drop one off at his house. But
oh, that's sweet.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the compilations and because. So as I was preparing for this episode, I bought some older magazines that are out of print, and I was trying to think conceptually about magazines, right? So I had an issue of Meltdown magazine from 2003, and it had a compilation that came with it. It was cool to me because it was this nostalgia trip that encapsulated all the music I was listening to at the time, which was around the time I was getting into the scene. So it had Cruise Shadows, Thou Shalt Not, Last Dance, Paralyzed Age, Dreamside, Ego Likeness, Voltaire, that kind of stuff. So it was this cool, wow, what a great time capsule. Yeah. The kind of thing you don't get from a Spotify playlist, right? Because it's this curated disc. So that obviously led me to think about the compilation that you have coming out in or are working on in collaboration with Cleopatra Records. You mentioned it for yourself, but Cleopatra Records, I think, was a formative experience for a lot of people. And so I was hoping you could talk about how that came to be and why that was something you wanted to do.
Yeah, I know. I absolutely. I mean, it certainly is a kind of head exploding moment when your Procession magazine is next to Cleopatra Records. And I'll probably talk longer about Cleopatra Records than the actual compilation. But I mean, there's the short answer is we're just really fortunate to be associated with the compilation, which is the Unquiet Grave. I'm Ethan Morales is the one who put it together, and he's actually the brainchild behind it. He started it in the late 90s. I remember having the first one on CD. I think I still have it somewhere. So he's the one he's the engine behind the whole thing, and his whole modus operandi is to just give bands exposure, because he said he had a lot of help when he was coming up with his projects, coming up in the scene, and he really just wants to pay it forward and feature kind of up and coming bands from the scene. So really, it's just we're just trying to help, or we're just happy to support that. And again, having the Procession Magazine name next to Cleopatra and the Unquiet Grave too, both at the same time, is kind of,
it's fantastic.
Right up there with being on Cemetery Confessions. So.
No, shut up. No, that's
seriously,
bullshit.
man.
No.
And then I will also have to say that Angela was
Benedict,
gracious enough to be on the cover, and we're just so thankful for that. It's a great photo, and she's wonderful, and we're just really, really, really appreciative of just everybody who put tracks into the compilation. Some great bands on there. Some from I'm not going to read off the list, but there are some amazing songs and amazing bands on the compilation, and it's just a cool thing, especially nowadays, to be a part of.
Yeah. Trey, you must have some kind of story about a Cleopatra record comp being important in your life, right?
I mean, Gothic Rock 1 and 2 were my gateway into goth for the most part. I mean, I started getting a handful. Like I've said in the past, I had a friend who gave me a list of bands to check out. But then when I branched off of that, I think it was probably at a Best Buy I got them too. I'm not sure if it was a Best Buy or a Tower Records, but I want to say it's more likely a Best Buy. I was just like going through, and I tended to go right to the various artists section because I didn't know what I was looking for. So I just go to various artists and look for things. And then, of course, it's got Gothic in the title, so I've got to go down that path. So yeah, Gothic Rock 1 and 2 were definitely my gateway. I listened the hell out of those.
Yeah.
In the 90s. That was that was definitely
it's
my ears to everything.
It's a great compilation. I think the second disc has some amazing songs on it. It has that Nosferatu song that I adore. And they have the Marionette song that always got a lot of club play because of the compilation.
Yeah, I think the big bands that introduced me to Corpus Delicti was one of them that I really gravitated to, and I think Deform was on them as well, but I'm not 100% sure on.
It wasn't on the first one, and I think it was later.
It might only be.
Yeah, I think it was later, only because I never put them in the goth bucket, and if they were on that, I would have. Yeah.
I don't really either. They're French experimental electronica, S&M performance art, and really more gravitating towards industrial, but I still love them.
Oh, they're so good.
And Cantique falls in goth pretty well.
True. That got a lot of club play.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think, it makes sense too, because I think compilations today from a reputable source, right, are fit into a lot of the same things we said about why the curation from magazines are important as well, because if I'm looking on Spotify for a playlist, for example, there's so many, and the quality of the playlists are so varied that it's I think having honestly, a lot of the music that I find now come from record labels that I follow on Bandcamp that I think sign good bands, and so having that resource, I think, is super useful. And like you said, Trey, just because everything exists on the internet doesn't mean it's easy to find. So knowing a big name label or a recognizable in the scene label can play, I think, a good role in discoverability.
Yeah, on that note, I will say, and I mentioned it before, but the Cold Transmission, and this is not a plug, although they're great people, really was what kind of brought me back not brought me back into the scene, but made me really excited about the scene again. I think a lot of people like myself kind of got a little stale in the early teens.
Yeah.
And I still listen to all the music. Like it wasn't that I didn't like the music, but there was just no more goth music anymore, and I started gravitating towards more of the industrial stuff, or maybe more of the, I don't even know what you want to call it, alternative club music. And some of the patchwork stuff, or basically just listening to the same artists that I kind of listen to. And you kind of got in a little rut, if you will, and and life happens, and I stopped going out and just kind of did other grown-up stuff, and it was fine and boring and non-eventful. And I think it really was around 2015 when you had bands like Twin Tribes and Actors and a lot of those bands. Drab Majesty, obviously. And one thing for me was I found through some of those bands, I found the Cold Transmission compilations, and I was like, oh shit, somebody's making new goth music. Like somebody's making some really, really cool dark wave music now. And there's so much of it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was I don't think the issue was so much of, take it or leave it. Some people love it. In the 90s, the complaint was more that there were so many Sisters clones that was the problem.
Yes.
I think the issue before 2015 was just there wasn't any music. Sort of after the death rock revival thing, there just wasn't any. No one was people were making music, but there just was not very much.
It was very, very few and far between. Yeah. Like you had I'm trying to think of what I was listening to that was gothy, but maybe it was like Terminal Gods. Kind of the earlier stuff. There were a few bands like I played the shit out of the Pretentious Moss CD because it was the only goth rock I liked. But mostly it was a lot of future pop bands that kind of kept going, and then which I love. I absolutely love. But there was definitely a good 3 or 4 year period where I remember listening to internet radio, and it kind of was just the same Project Pitchfork over and over again, and then you start to tune it off after a little bit. You're like, okay, I guess this is it.
That was also when I think people were getting. There was a time, what was it, like 2012 or 13 or something, when Witch House started gaining popularity and New Goth, and people were getting really upset because I think they were worried about, is this what goth is now? Because that's just what the music is going to be, because no one's going to make any post-punk or dark wave or cold wave or anything. It's just going to be this.
Yeah. I mean, it's a legit. Look, I'm. That's a topic I know nothing about and can't speak on. But I do get it. I really, really do get it, because it is. But the good thing is I think it came back with a vengeance. And around that same time there was a shitload of good goth rock kind of coming out, and now we're just living in Magic Christmas land, where every time I open up Bandcamp, I'm like, oh my god, this is my new favorite band. And so it's good stuff.
So let me ask you another conceptual music question, because that's how I think about everything is conceptually. So I was reading an old issue. They're all old, but I was reading an old issue of Drop Dead magazine, and there was an interview with Cinema Strange where they were talking about changing styles over time, because they had started with more of a Batcave look, and then they pivoted away from that. As that kind of became during that period, it became more popular, and they said it didn't serve musical culture to retread what had been done. And then similarly, I'm also reading the book In His Own Words, with interviews with Roz Williams, and Roz was speaking a similar sentiment about rejecting the death rock label, because when he talked about what went into his music, he was saying the old, I want to create art that pushes a boundary rather than fitting into a preconception. On the other hand, you have people like the superheroines who openly embraced being death rock, and like Eva O, who would say in interviews that she both took music very, very seriously and would also say that she is a death rocker and her style is death rock and that kind of thing in music interviews. So I wondered if you had any thoughts on that sort of dichotomy of music staying within what's expected of the scene, like sort of all the wave bands that we have right now, versus a pursuit of that lesser tread artistic path.
I mean, look, I'm certainly not an artist, so I can't. I'm not one to pontificate, or this is my disclaimer before I start pontificating. But I'm certainly not one to pontificate about.
These are stunt pontifications. None of these pontifications are real.
This is just me and the peanut. Look, from just a fan, a pure unadulterated fan, there can never be too many Sisters of Mercy clones. Like, everybody complained about the Mary Thoughts and Rosetta Stone, and I said, you're getting more Sisters of Mercy. Why are you complaining about it? It's just more of it. Like I love the trad goth style, the template, if you will. You give me some, really jangly guitars and a 12-string, and I'm there in for the ride. Like, don't fuck with the formula, man. Do not, don't make a ballad out of it. Don't make it all industrial. Like, just give me straight down the pipe goth rock, and I am happy as a clam. And it doesn't have to be good. Like, I listen to so much bad goth rock, but same thing. I mean, the same thing. Like, I've been really lately. It's funny. I've been really getting into like industrial music lately, and I really like the template, like just straight up industrial kind of style. Saw Julian K open for the Birthday Massacre, and my God, that's just like their harmonic disruptor is so good, and it is just like straight down the pipe, like industrial guitars, industrial vocals, like just good stuff, man. And there's a whole, I mean, there's a whole bunch of artists that I've been listening to industrial wise that are just, they're great. They do it. And Curse Mackey, Gulf Boulevard, just straight up stripped down industrial music, and I love it. And it's like comfort food. That being said, I also do appreciate experimental, crazy music that kind of pushes boundaries as well. So I do understand the desire to not get stuck in a genre or box yourself in. Like, as an artist, I do feel it could be very hard to just try to pump out the same records over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But again, this is just me being a fan.
Yeah.
I think Drab Majesty is one of those bands that, and I know there's, I'm not debating it, but they're another band that kind of did push the envelope and came up with something just absolutely exquisite. And, I don't think anybody could have expected, that kind of outside the box type of music. But once it's here, you're like, man, this should have always existed. This is wonderful.
Yeah. The argument, I don't like the dichotomy of the you're either, if you're playing to the genre, you're creating a stale culture,
right?
Versus people that pioneered the genre and said, this, I don't like the label because of insert whatever variety of influences from outside the scene. Those were the real artists, kind of thing. I don't think, besides the fact that art is completely subjective, I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive, and I don't think one is bad for the scene and one is better for the scene. Any artist is going to have any variety of influences. whatever their motivations are, regional influence, personal history with music, their own various philosophies on music and art. Even so, I think something as straightforward as a cover band, they'll still have their own unique flavor placed onto the music.
Yeah.
And so, like, when we do album reviews, and I might complain that the band sounds too similar to a different band, or maybe they've utilized this trope that I've heard too many times. That's also just my own perspective based on my own tastes and my own listening history, and that may come across completely differently to someone else. And I think that's a non-trivial point, because the music, the person listening to the music isn't going to be a musicologist, right? They're not going to be this scene expert, this seasoned music expert. And I don't think someone who is a seasoned music expert should dictate the enjoyment of any given individual either. I think the music is interactive. It's something this is what I think, created through a process that's reciprocal between the music and the listener, the artist and the crowd, if it's a club, or friends listening together, which means that the experience of the music is dynamic. It's never going to be the same across time. That experience is never going to be static. It's going to be dynamic, right? So it creates a complexity of art. So I don't think the argument of like, oh, it's just a sister's clone, I think it's too reductive, right? We already kind of know intuitively, like, if you listen to music and you're happy, or you're hungry, or you're horny, or you're high, or whatever, that's going to impact how you feel about the music, and it's going to impact what goes into the creation of the music. And so I don't worry too much about how boundary pushing the music is in the scene. One of the things I find very, very, and I don't know if it's unique, but I do think there is a uniqueness to the scene, is how it incorporates different styles into it, and I always think of it like a blob, like the movie The Blob, where it just kind of puts its arms, or puts its blobular blob around different bands and different styles, like a band like the Actors, who are wonderful and excellent, but they're not a goth band. They have great music, and I know they have a little like 80s kind of twinge to them, and I know they are dabble in post-punk, but I always find them, and I love them, but I always do find it interesting when I'm listening to it. I'm like, this is totally not like This Is Just a Mercy at all. And yet you can listen, and then there's future pop, and then there's like Dead Can Dance, and then there's doom metal out there as well, and yet somehow the scene, if you will, kind of just gobbles it all up and says, nope, this is all part of it. You can have your tickets to go see Dead Can Dance, and then you can go see Bauhaus, and then you can go see Ego Likeness, and it's all the same people. And I think that makes it special, for sure, and really cool. I like the metaphor. I like the monster metaphor for sure. I'll resist the urge to inflict critical theory upon everyone and just reference a similar metaphor from a YouTuber I watched called the Kilted Goth, who unfortunately has passed on now, so rest in peace. But he used to use a similar metaphor of the vacuum cleaner for goth, and I think it's a very similar thing that I like. Well, so going back to Procession Magazine, then I wanted to ask what the creative process for each issue looks like, because as an example, I've really loved how you've been experimenting with text formatting in more recent issues, and kind of playing around with less traditional ways of structuring the content, which I think works out really well, and I've really enjoyed. And I also know from doing this podcast that doing something on a regular schedule. And also I've worked a little bit with alternative magazines over the years, and a little tiny ways over the years.
Yeah.
People don't really generally do it as their day job, and a lot of it relies on donated time. So it's easy to be creative up front and then fall into kind of what works and then stick to that instead of innovating and having fun with it. So I just wanted to ask how you kind of keep everything fresh and work through the process of each issue.
I mean, at the top here, I just have to say that the design is 120% Renee Ramos, who is a graphic designer here in the DC area, who reached out after issue 2, which is why it got infinitely better after issue 2. It wasn't me sitting there on Photoshop doing stuff. But he's been the engine that really drives all the creativity in it. And it's his artistic vision. He just sends me stuff and I say that looks fabulous. And then he tells me print stuff about margins and I say, and I nod and I say that's exactly it. And he goes and he's really been the engine behind the look and the feel, and just it looks awesome because of him. And he's definitely a big fan of the scene too. We were out we were at Darkwave Nights here in DC. We saw Ego Likeness and the Neuro Farm here. And we saw the Birthday Massacre. So he's really into he's really into the scene as well. So he does have the language, if you will, of, you know, what works and what doesn't and stuff like that. As far as the production schedule goes, this is not, spoiler alert, this is not my day job by any stretch of the imagination, but I absolutely love doing it. It's definitely a lot of work. There's a lot of kind of grunt work that goes on, but it is one of those things that once you get the issue out the door, it's a pretty nice feeling. So I guess it's worth it. You know, and yeah, we're basically doing it. It's a 3-month production schedule, and I just have to herd cats constantly, myself included. That's not that is just me trying to keep on top of it. It's kind of like surfing on a tidal wave where you know, you just keep going. But you know, you get to go to dark side of the con. You get to, you know, do some really cool stuff, and it's all worth it in the end, at least to me. So it's fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's the most important thing. Once it's not fun, then it's a nightmare.
Yes, pretty much.
So if you were running Procession in the 80s and you were picking 3 bands to feature in the first issue, who would they be and why?
Ooh. From the 80s. I have 2 answers to that. The first, I mean, I want to kind of just say like Sisters of Mercy, Bauhaus, and Susie and the Banshees.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Because they're good. Here's a little thing. I am not as big of an 80s goth as most are.
Fair enough.
My gothness starts around 1992. No, what my answer, I think, and I think it's a great question. Really, I hate nostalgia, and I think that's what makes it difficult to conceptualize it, because I'm not really interested in, you know, what Bauhaus was doing in the 80s. I'm sure it was fun, and I'm sure it involved something, you know, unpublishable. But I'm more interested in kind of the new song that they released. You know, what their process was behind that. I know it was kind of it's an Exquisite Corpse type project, but I'm more interested in what they're doing today and kind of what they think of, you know, today. I'm the whole point of the Procession magazine is kind of not nostalgia,
right?
Where I think my general rule, and I have broken it once or twice, is the artists have to be doing something new. Like there has to be a new release, there has to be a new material, or at least a new tour or something like that within the last year or two. Because I really just don't find the nostalgia trap of, the Sisters of Mercy were great in 1988, and Vision Thing's the best, or Floodland's the best album ever. And yeah, you know what, it might have been, but there's just so much cool stuff kicking around now.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important too, because I think goth as a subculture does have a nostalgia problem.
Mm-hmm.
So having a voice that can sort of break us out of that and open our eyes to stuff is actually happening now. It's not all back in the day. We can't live in this world of back in the day.
Right.
So yeah, hearing voices like your magazine, or Scary Lady Sarah, our DJ out here, likes to have a night that she only plays stuff that was released after 2000, and even that's getting long in the tooth, but at least it's something. Yeah.
Or like Obscura Undead's a big big fan of them, and I think that's their ethos too, is we need to, whatever new acts, or we need to put emphasis on them. And again, I do try to like balance it, because there's some acts which I just absolutely adore, and it's like Diane Lakine, they had a new album.
I was oh my, I squealed out loud when I saw that you had them in one of the issues, because that's one of my favorite bands. And they did have a new album. They had the double,
so it's like sometimes, and again, I think that's completely valid. Like I don't want to exclude artists and say you're too old, or but certainly if Andrew Eldritch knocked on my door, would I say no? I don't know, that's kind of a thought experiment, but I tell him release a damn album and we can come back to me.
Didn't he say he was going to make one after Trump got elected or something?
He said
he did.
Yeah. I think it's the thought is better than the actuality.
Yeah, probably true. Yeah. Although he did make new songs, right? He plays them at concerts. Yes. So he just hasn't released them, I guess.
I think who knows? I mean, again, I do really like the Sisters of Mercy, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I completely agree with everything you both said, but I also like nostalgic, so I'm going to give you my answer if I got to interview three bands from the 80s. So my first would be Susie, because she hated doing interviews and didn't, after a while, stopped doing them. And all the interviews I've read with her from goths are so dull and rote that they kind of just become parodies of themselves by asking every single stereotypical question you could think of. So I think I would enjoy the challenge of it. I'd probably also want to interview one of the small bands that only put out a few songs that no one talks about now, because I think that would provide some interesting context. So maybe somebody like The Naked and the Dead from New York would be interesting. And then I'd probably interview Paralysis Permanente from Spain, because I love that band, and their career was cut short after the singer died tragically in a car crash. So getting to interview them would be super cool. So that's my answer.
That is a deep cut.
Yeah, the first ones that came to mind for me, because it's just impossible to interview them now, is basically Joy Division and Christian Death under Roz. Because you can't get Ian or Roz anymore, obviously. So those were like the first two that came to my mind. Is like, I want to interview someone who it's impossible to find, rattling around this mortal coil right now.
The thing with Roz is, because I've been reading this book where it's basically a bunch of interviews with him. The questions I would want to ask him, which are basically clearing up like the billions of rumors about him, the interviewer asks him these questions, and his answers are basically always like, I think it's more fun to just not know the answer. So I don't think I would get any like good new juicy and context out of that, because he just liked the mystery of it. Like one of the questions was of one of the shows that they played, I can't remember the venue, but Ron Athey carried him out and then put him on a cross and crucified him and cut his hands or his wrists.
Oh, gosh.
And there was a rumor about whether or not he was wearing a loincloth or whether he was completely naked. And so she asked him that question to like clarify, were you naked or not? And he's like, I was crucified. I think that's a little more interesting than whether I was naked or not. It's like, okay, fair enough.
I will say you could not. That is completely obsolete these days, because that would be on TikTok and Instagram, and there would be no question about it. So,
yeah.
One thing one thing, I would really just like to add is kind of just go back to that idea of community, because I think we did talk about the origin stories of Procession Magazine, and I think one of the most important things to me with doing the magazine was the community aspect of the goth scene, because kind of, as I said, when I started it, I was completely outside of it in a way. I mean, I live in suburban Washington, D.C., and nobody knows who the Sisters of Mercy are, let alone Skinny Puppy or the Boot Blacks or Drab Majesty. Like I've been to enough kiddie softball games, and people come up and they ask the dreaded, so what kind of music do you like? And you kind of, it's a trap. You can't answer it. I can't be like, it's like you don't know any of them, and they're like, no, try me. I like a lot of music. You would be surprised. And then I'm like, Gary Newman. And they're like, the guy who did Cars? And I'm like, no, I like new Gary Newman with the goth and the industrial and the all the stuff. And it's so more my point.
His newer version of Cars is pretty hard.
Oh, dude, he's excellent. Like we saw him a few weeks ago, and that more just getting the frame of reference to people who aren't in the scene is like, you just forget until you're like completely removed from it, that not everybody revolves their mind around like Final Pants and like like not everybody knows who Skinny Puppy is. What kind of world do we live in? But that's kind of the world before I started the magazine, kind of. And I do feel like there are a lot of people out there who, it is hard. You take it for granted. And I'm starting to take it for granted, which is just kind of why I wanted to talk about it, is, it is hard to connect with people. So one of the things that I think, and in some ways a self-indulgent way, not necessarily self-indulgent, but in a way it was just I wanted to connect to people, and kind of build. And then it's the nut I have not cracked yet. And the one thing I really, really want to do is to build, more of a goth community. I think there's an excellent one now. I'm not saying it that way. I just feel like there's so much to give to it. And I think connecting people and, building that kind of relationships and building the scene up is like super important. And it's something I've always taken, I always took for granted. It was like, oh, there's always a goth club going on. Or there's always goths around, like, and not having that, you really like, oh my God. And not to bring it back to this podcast, but I do feel like, that this podcast is equally as important. And just what a lot of the stuff that people are doing out there. I do feel like the magazine's like one small blip in an ocean of just awesomeness. But it really is that community building that I'm very, very interested in.
Well, yeah, I think that's important, and I think it's important to be active in that, because I think that's how sometimes how scenes or venues die because people feel like, oh, it is ubiquitous. And of course, there's always stuff going on. And then but then that's how everybody feels, and they stop going out, and then it suddenly doesn't exist anymore. So it's always there until it's not there. Yeah. And then, so you have to be proactive about it or it's not going to be around, So I think that is definitely important.
Yeah. And it does mean like I am on cloud 9 nowadays, because like somebody the other day said I was their friend and they like goth music, and I was like, oh shit, I have a goth friend now.
Yay.
Like, that's cool, man.
Hell yeah.
No, and in all seriousness, it's like, I'm very appreciative of everybody who's in the scene, everybody who goes out to events, everybody who just does stuff in it. It's so cool, and as I said, so magical.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap up with let me do just the 2 questions that I've been trying to ask everyone this year that are kind of sibling questions. So the first is the more pessimistic one, or I guess it doesn't have to be, but what are you most concerned about, or what would you change about goth right now?
I mean, I think this goes back to my long soliloquy that I just said, where I really want to see it get bigger. I think it's on an upswing, but I really, really, really want to see more people going out and more people doing stuff. Not necessarily in a backwards looking way, but certainly more goth nights, more bigger events. I mean, that being said, we do live in a very, very nice time where you have Cold Waves and Terminus and Absolution Fest, Dark Side of the Con. So there's a lot of energy out there. So I just want it to get bigger and better, man.
Yeah. And then what I guess you kind of did already answer this. What you're most excited about? It's just
I mean, I'm excited to see a bunch of really cool bands. World Goth Day is coming up. I mean, that's going to be really, really exciting. I think it's going to be a really, really good summer with just a lot of bands kind of out there, especially after kind of what the last 2 years. It's almost a fire hose of I've been out
definitely
every Saturday, plus I was out Monday, plus it's great, but it's just it is it's awesome. I'll just leave it at that and say it's really, really exciting, it's really awesome, and I hope it keeps going, man.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
All right. Well, Chris, thank you again so much. If folks are interested, obviously they can head over to the Procession website. Do you want to point them to social media or just the website?
ProcessionMagazine.com is where you can view and purchase the magazine. We do have a Facebook page and an Instagram account, which I once in a while post drunken concert photos too. They're kind of blurry and you can kind of see Stephen Archer in the background, but no, we do. You can definitely follow us on social media, and I will just encourage, if you have any questions or you just want to check out the magazine, email me at procession.arts@gmail.com. and I would try to respond. We're always looking for cool stuff, and we just want to keep it going, man. Keep Gotham.
Awesome, for sure. Thanks, Chris. Yeah. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you. It's great.
No, thanks, guys.
Album review.
All right, so this month we are reviewing the newest album by Har Belex called Campo de Urnas, and this is on Caustic Records. Har Belex is formed by Mannix S. and Salva Main. These are two folks who have been in EBM bands previously, and they came together for this new project. From the website, it says to enhance their concerns and common passions, which are the love of nature, local traditions, history, alienation of religion, and modern society. The band is from Spain. I did look up the two musicians because it doesn't say, it just says they have careers in electronic and the EBM scene.
Mm-hmm.
So Salva Main is the singer from Culture, which I was a massive fan of and still am a fan of. I just haven't listened to them in a long time, but I played the shit out of their music back in the day. The amount of times I drove down Main Street with the windows down, absolutely blasting their song Wonder, or really the whole album that song is on, are too many times to count. So I didn't know that when I listened to this album, but it explained to me why this felt so immediately comfortable and familiar, since that's like one of my all-time favorite sort of melodic synth pop bands. And then Mannix is from a band, or was in a band in the early 2000s called Pale, which I had not heard of, but I did go back and listen to one of their albums at least, and I kind of skimmed through one of the other ones, and it was kind of a fun nostalgia trip. It's kind of I hadn't heard them before, but it was really kind of an identifiably early 2000s industrial band, kind of like Decoded Feedback or Absurd Minds, or even a little bit of like Suicide Commando, something like that. Not something I would listen to a lot of, but something I hadn't heard in a long time, so it was kind of fun to listen to, but completely different from this band. So to get a taste of this band, I'm going to play a track from the album. And I have decided to play the track Gentilari, which was my absolute favorite track off of this album, and absolutely loved this song. So that's what I'm going to play.
On the top of the mountains, in towns and inside twisted caves, they were so tall that the forest just barely covered their knees. Their arms were so strong that they had fun throwing pieces of hills to the sky that flew over forests and valleys, leaving timeless marks all over the land. They enjoyed the light of the full moon, dancing round the sacred stone, everyone with the shape of his shadow. Long ago when the history began, but a strange cloud came with the sunrise, moved by Sapphire, the bell and the cross. On its side they felt a deep weakness and a freezing cold in their bones. Terrified by the astonishing cloud, they asked for advice. The wise man said, please just go away, for the end of the race has come. Terrified by the astonishing cloud, they asked for advice. The wise man said, please just go away, for the end of our race has come. It's time for us to go. In the west, they found a deep abyss, and they stumbled together through it. With a big stone they covered the entrance, and no one ever saw them again. Terrified by the astonishing cloud, they asked for advice. The wise man said, please just go away, for the end of our race has come. Terrified by the astonishing cloud, they asked for advice. The wise man said, please just go away, for the end of our race has come. It's time for us to go.
Have you ever heard of Pale or Culture?
I'd heard of Culture. I can't place a sound with them, but the band definitely rings a bell. Because when you said it, I'm like, yeah, I know that one because it's got a K in there. It's Culture with a K. Well, the second one is at least. So I knew at least that much about them, and I knew they were somewhere around that turn of the millennia time frame, but I couldn't place the music at all.
All right, so I'm going to share my thoughts on this album. So I mentioned I was a fan of Culture, which means a huge selling point of this album for me were the vocals. So the first thing about the vocals is that you have clear vocals. It's not a dark wave album that is drenched in reverb and delay. These are naked vocals for the most part. Occasionally you'll get Salva's voice layered on top of itself to create kind of like a chorus effect, I guess. But otherwise you just get Salva's voice throughout the album. And I'm a sucker for gorgeous vocalists. And he has such a beautiful voice, such a beautiful accent, and a beautiful delivery. He goes from an almost kind of understated vocal presentation, kind of a restrained romantic vocal, to these soaring overtures. And I actually do think his voice is similar in many ways to Alexander's voice from Dine Lachayan.
I was going to say that too.
It's not as sonorous, but I think it's just as resonant. It's a slightly higher register, but I think there are a lot of similarities. Yeah. So you already know that I am going to love this album, right?
As soon as I heard the first track and I heard the voice, I'm like, okay, Danny's going to love this one. Because Dine Lachayan was the first name that came to mind as soon as I played it. Though because I'm not as familiar with Culture, I'm sure that would have come to mind too, had I been more familiar with them.
Instrumentally, it is I think classified as neo-folk or neoclassical, but to me, I would just call this like romantic music. For a long time, romantigoth as a fashion and lifestyle was basically my whole thing, and a big part of that was just kind of when I got into the scene, because that was really prolific throughout goth culture. That sort of neo-Victorian, hyper-decadent aesthetic. And that's how I adorned myself and decorated my surroundings and presented myself. And that's less of a part of my life these days. I don't go around listening to Helium Vola 24/7 and wearing really expensive handmade like neo-Victorian suits and stuff like that. But those touches of romanticism always kind of pull at that nostalgia and touch on those pressure points in my brain in just the right ways. So obviously this album elicited a lot of beautiful imagery and emotion as I was listening to it. Lyrically, I don't know that I can give a great evaluation because probably about half of the songs are not in English. I couldn't catch every single word of the English songs, but for the most part, I did enjoy the themes that I was picking up on being explored. So I grabbed a few of the tracks just as an example. Waves, I think, was primarily about the existential questions of what impact our actions have in the world and what meaning we can find in our embodied interaction with other people and our environment, which you know that I'm automatically interested in. One More Nail seems to be about self-deception and the critical importance of sort of reflective introspection with the goal of trying to make a change within ourselves before it's too late and we've kind of created damage that's beyond repair. And then War is primarily about the kind of false justifications of war and the long-lasting consequences that is becomes, I guess, embedded in the people and places that are left to deal with the consequences of that conflict decades afterwards. At least that's what I got out of those, because the lyrics aren't listed on the Bandcamp page, so you have to do it old school. And I don't have the jewel case to read it either. So, and then musically, you get this gorgeous melodic acoustic guitar. You get some smatterings of drum machine, stringed instruments, and occasional synth. It's not goth, but clearly, and we don't have to again get into this like, is Dead Can Dance goth? How do you connect Dead Can Dance to Specimen? But it's the band, like I said, they play goth festivals. They're on Caustic Records, which industrial fans I think will probably know about. But again, I don't need to justify this as being relevant to goth because it's my goddamn podcast and I loved it. So it's a 5 out of 5. Fuck off. It's my show.
All right. You go, girl. Cool. Yeah. I mean, like I said before, as soon as I turned it on, I knew you would love it just because it had those big Dino Lacayan vibes. And I know that you're a huge fan of Dino Lacayan. I definitely agree the voice is similar. I also agree with kind of your description. It doesn't go as low and resonant as Dino Lacayan, but
Alexander Volavnov is his name. Just to say that.
Appreciate that. So it's not as low and resonant as Alexander, but it has that similar, very strong, well-supported, classically trained style. It's not just a rock voice or a wispy singer-songwriter kind of voice. It's got that the weight of someone who has most likely had some classical training. So I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that a lot. And I do like the fact that they were, up front and center. I've definitely complained in the past when we've had albums where the vocals were buried. I mean, I love me some, My Bloody Valentine and Cocteau Twins when the voices are just part of the instrumental texture. But I am a bit of a vocalist myself, so I enjoy getting to appreciate vocals that are up front and center. And I do like the whole dark folk genre that they definitely proclaim themselves as being, and I would agree with that. It definitely had that very stripped back sound, not a lot of effects. Love the instrumentation, the classical guitar, the strings. I really enjoyed the accordion in a handful of songs too. I like that classic touch from, you get that in European folk music. You don't get it much else. And not the kind of accordion that tends to get a bad rap, the polka accordion or
Right.
the thing like that, which has its place, but no, it's the classical sort of the French cafe kind of
Yeah.
accordion accompaniment that comes with things, or that is used in a lot of European or Irish kind of folk music. That sort of feel that it pairs very well with the strings and the guitar. So that very stripped down thing. And there were hints, like you said, of some synth work, some sampled work, but it was really, really just there for little bits of ear candy. It did not take the floor or anything. I really enjoyed the fact that the album was mixed between the English and Spanish languages. I thought that was really interesting. It almost seems to do back and forth, an English track and a Spanish track and an English track and a Spanish track. There were a couple of periods where it didn't quite match that pattern, but I really enjoyed it. And I actually really liked the Spanish tracks better because it felt like they were more confident in that language. So their melodic lines were more flowing and they seemed to fit, the sort of rhythmic meter of the language better. They felt more free to use more complicated melodies just because they were more comfortable with the language, where the English songs oftentimes felt a little bit more stilted. The singing melodies were a little bit more static, jumping between a handful of notes, kind of a classic EBM style, where it's like da 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 da. It's very it does a lot of that. And if you're not as comfortable with the language and how it flows, it's easier to do something like that. It gets a powerful melody across, whereas it was much more lyrical when it was in the Castilian Spanish. That was really nice to listen to. So I really enjoyed that. So my favorite tracks were a couple in the Spanish ones. I did enjoy, the one that was your favorite, but I loved Lo Invisible. Was probably one of my favorite, which is one right before the one you really liked. And then also Premonition was another one that I really liked. I also liked the sort of change of pace about halfway through the album. Like Waves was sort of a cut off. The first half of the album was more folky, was more sort of calming and peaceful and almost pastoral folk. A lot of like folk song type things. And then it got sort of hard and almost militaristic towards the latter half. I was getting a little bit of like Leather Strip's Symphony of the Dead? Serenade for the Dead. That's what it was. Serenade for the Dead vibes. That one Leather Strip album where they went full on synth orchestral thing.
I haven't heard that one, but yeah, that's a good call out. Yeah.
But I really enjoyed that sort of change up. I don't know which side of it I liked better, because it's obviously my two favorite tracks. One is in the first half and one is in the second half. But I really liked that change up right in the middle. It kept it from staying too samey, because sometimes folk albums in general, not just dark folk, but folk albums in general can get, it's a little samey. It's a guy with a guitar or a girl with a guitar oftentimes, and I enjoy that for quite a while. It's one of the genres that I really like, but it's easy to get kind of burnt out on it if they're not changing up. But they had enough shifts in instrumentation when they not just the unaccompanied guitar, which was a very well played classical guitar. It was very nice. It wasn't just the guy strumming by the fireside. There was some good finger picking in there. There was some great sort of, I wouldn't say it went full on to Spanish guitar, which is a genre I really love, that and flamenco styles. I didn't get a lot of, even though they're a Spanish band, I didn't really get a lot of strong, what I associate as an outsider with Spanish classical guitar or Spanish folk styles of music. I really got more of a kind of a Central Northern European, Germanic, Scandinavian folk, which dovetails into Irish folk as well, since Scandinavia and Ireland are a little bit of a conquering history there. A lot of back and forth, but I got more of a feel of that. Some of those sort of almost folk rocky bands that you can catch at Irish festivals or Oktoberfest type things was more the feel I was getting than a Spanish folk or a flamenco classical Spanish guitars type feel. But I enjoyed all of it. It was really good. And like I said, I really enjoyed the inclusion of the accordion along with the strings. And usually it was more of a solo string, either a violin or a viola. I'm not really sure which one it was. It was usually played pretty low in the register. So it could have been a viola. I suspect it was a violin or a fiddle, though. But yeah, I really liked the album. I thought it was really good. Similar to you, I don't have a real good grasp of all the lyrics. I didn't necessarily have a lot of trouble understanding the English ones, and I know a little bit of Spanish, so I was kind of able to, I know that word. Oh, I know that word, but not enough to say, I know this whole meaning. I mean, their Bandcamp page gives little blurbs about some of the meanings of some of the songs. And I think I saw online when I searched them something that claimed to have lyrics, but I didn't click through to it to actually read them. So I don't know, but I enjoyed their concepts of, themes of nature and environmentalism and alienation and just sort of that disconnect of humanity with the world around us in today's modern society. So I do enjoy those themes. So if that's what they were really talking about, I respect that. I just hadn't looked into the lyrics enough to really know how well they were talking about them. But yeah, overall, a good album. I'm not going to go 5 out of 5 just because I never do. But I'd say a good solid 4.5 out of 5. Yeah, it's a really good album. I definitely recommend it. I definitely bought it myself. So if you like that sort of dark folk thing, or interested in any of the more sort of acoustic, or even if you like, that sort of EBM-y future pop with the clean vocal singing, but aren't attached to having synth arpeggios going constantly through it and an ounce beat, this works really, really well. It's not very heavy on the percussion when the percussion does come in. It's more of that sort of, I guess, military snare and bass drum kind of thing. A lot of snare rolls and stuff like that come in when they do bring percussion in. But yeah, it's a really good album.
Fantastic. All right, it's time for Sinister Suggestions.
So you've got to be interested in death. It's the last great taboo. It's the only taboo left.
Precisely. I mean, why is it, do you think, that everyone in here is dressed in black? It's a celebration of death.
No, I just like the clothes.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, the clothes look good. Yeah, I mean, death looks good. Charles Manson, yeah? No, he was cool.
Don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'm actually a vampire.
Sinister Suggestions.
I'm gonna speed run some albums here. Same thing we did last month. I got some positive feedback from a few people who said they enjoyed getting the music suggestions and having the links to the bands that I mentioned in the show notes so they could go check that out and have some stuff to listen to during the month, and also having some of the tracks picked out and played during the segment to listen to underneath my sort of short reviews of the songs. So again, this is not a sort of a here are all the albums that came out this month. That's not what this is. This is just a smattering of releases that I ran into and thought were worth checking out. Definitely not comprehensive in any way. The first is the EP Pan's Not Dead by the band The Flower of Love. This is a new project from Babis, who we talked about last month. It is a post-punk garage rock sort of sound. So I love that you get that grungy guitar and drum fronting the tracks with these soaring, almost epic hooks, and then occasional melodic breakdowns that are just gorgeous and lush, juxtaposed against these kind of guitar sludge kind of power chord riffs that you get in some spots. It's almost like remember when there were some goths that were super into Soundgarden? It's like if you made Soundgarden actually good. So then on top of that, you get a beautiful, soft, melodic vocal that ties everything together. It's not for everyone because it's not straight up like post-punk or goth, but I quite enjoyed it and I think it's worth checking out.
I feel attacked. I kind of like Soundgarden. I like Soundgarden.
That's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. The next is the new single from the band Male Tears called Dominate. And this is from James, who's a super cool dude. James listens to Cemetery Confessions and was actually just on Obscura Undead with Xander talking about, who are they talking about? The French Police, I think. But Male Tears is an amazing music project. The new single is an absolute club banger. The industrial beats are dancey, but also creepy in a really fun and interesting way that I really enjoy. The track is structured really well, and the vocals are haunting and interesting and dynamic. And I had a lot of fun stomping to this track. The next is a single from Cemetery Asylum called Nothing Left, Homeless Demo, and this is from another friend of mine, the talented Nyx. This was a song about her recent experience with homelessness and her struggle with depression. It's a fantastic song. There's what I think is a xylophone and a tambourine in there. I'm not completely sure, but I love that because it harkens back to like Susie and the Banshees and the Mission, I think. It's a gorgeous song. Nyx has an incredible voice that's really, really gorgeous. It's a great track. Like I said, she's had a lot of hardship recently and is dealing with a lot. So if you follow the link to Bandcamp and buy the song, I know that she would really appreciate that. The next is this is an album, right? Yeah, the new album from Forever Grey. This is the 4th album from Forever Grey. And I like this band and their brand of slow tempo darkwave. It's bass guitar driven with lots of synth and drum machine, and a lot of it feels like less is more, which I can get into. The vocals are fine. They're serviceable. You get the deep goth male vocal and it's fine. And then Samantha, the other member of the group, provides some vocals on some tracks, which I think is a nice touch. I really like those. But personally, for me, it just takes a lot for me to like, well, not to like, but to more than like that kind of deep eldritch vocal to stand out and be interesting. I think it's fine. But the music is a real kind of look down at your shoes and shuffle kind of album. A good kind of Cloudy Day at the Cemetery album. So it's one of those, I think, situational albums that I would throw on when I'm in a specific mood. The next is a album called Costo Humano by Puerta Negra, which is a synth-punk industrial band from Portland, Oregon. So it's not something that's necessarily goth, but you definitely get that punk influence on this record through the vocals, which are absolutely killer. You get this scratchy, sort of shouted animalistic vocal and this old school EBM shouted male vocal, which is all in Spanish. It's just super good dancey EBM, and I love that there's this whole slew of newer bands doing new takes on classic EBM, because I love classic EBM, and I think the newer genre interpretations of that are fantastic. The album was mastered and produced by Susan Subtract of High Functioning Flesh, and you can definitely hear some similarities between those two bands. I think Multiple Man might be another good point of comparison, but it's just a kick-ass album if you're looking for something adjacent to goth. The next thing I have for you is the new single called Bloody Ghosts by Cliff and Ivy, who are, of course, Alaska's only goth rock duo. It's actually super fun. I guess I wasn't surprised how fun it was, but it's just it was nice to have a fun goth song. It's kind of a garage rock song as well. It's got that kind of guitar line that carries through the track, and then you have Ivy doing like a really kind of hypnotic early 70s punk rock vocal that is nicely reverbed to what turns out to, I think, have a really nice effect. It's super catchy, and it just makes me feel like I'm at a punk rock club in London in the 70s when I play it, and just ready to have a really good time. So I'm all in on this track. I think it's really good. The next is, what do I have? Escarta Descarto by DGA 95. This is the new album from the Chilean death rock band DGA 95. It's an interesting album because it doesn't feel like an album. It's really chaotic and not really cohesive. So, for example, it starts with an intro song that isn't connected to the second song, which is a cover song, and then the cover song is followed by two different versions of the same song, and then there are two more remix songs on the album. So it's a bit of a weird album to listen straight through, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it was unexpected, I guess. It's not super polished in terms of production and kind of balancing like the vocals with the drums, for example, but it's a death rock DIY album, so that's not really why you come to, or what you come to the genre for. There are definitely some surprises, like there's an 8-minute electronic track just right in the middle of the album it's really disorienting and creepy and injected with like vocal utterings in this experimental mishmash that is just really cool. It's probably my favorite song on the album. So it's this weird, inconsistent album. I feel like if it was me, I would have switched the second half with the first half, but I think if you get through it, I think there are some really good gems on there for sure, so it's definitely worth checking out. Next up is the new single Ashtray Ballet by A Starry Night. This is a fun track that sounds very early 2000s to me, and is a bit reminiscent of the synth pop bands of the time, as well as like Solitary Experiments or Diorama or X Divide, which I'm a sucker for. I love those bands. Lyrically, I think it's pretty boring and cliche. And I only read the lyrics because when you go to the Bandcamp page, it's the song and then the lyrics are right under that. So I just read through it. It's basically a breakup song. But who listens to lyrics anyway, right? So who cares? I think it's a good song, though. Okay, next up is the new album from VR Sex called Rough Dimension. And VR Sex is the side project, or I guess new project, of Deb Demure of, well, I guess he doesn't go by that for VR Sex, but the person from Drab Majesty. I'm not a huge fan of VR Sex. I mean, I think the album is fine. I don't know if I can really place my finger on why. I think it's just kind of mediocre. There are tracks on this album that I think are very good. So Taste of Hate, for example, I think is very good. Taken as a whole, though, it feels kind of repetitive to me. The songs kind of bleed into each other, and just genre-wise, I think it's harkening back to sort of March Violets and Lords of the New Church, those sorts of bands. So if you're into that kind of thing, you should definitely check it out. Personally, I'd rather listen to something like Arctic Flowers, for example. So I don't know, not to complain too much, but it's a new release, so I wanted to bring it up. After that is, what do I have? Freddo Rationale by Spitzker, which is a Italian post-punk band. And this is I think, really fun, dancey album that is very synth-heavy. It does also kind of fall into the problem of sounding a bit too samey if you listen through it all the way through, but I think it's a solid darkwave post-punk kind of album. So if you're looking for more of that, definitely check that out. After that is Sedate Seduce, the new album by Nino Sable. Nino Sable is one of those musicians that I would maybe compare to like Feeding Fingers, for example, who is just really flexible and puts a wide range of influence into their music, where no two songs really kind of sound the same, and each song has its own vibe and atmosphere and mastery. Though Nino Sable is more electronics based, whereas Feeding Fingers is more sort of like conventional instrument focused. While there are tracks on this album that are more similar to what you would expect of a modern post-punk album, that's like kind of post-punk with the kind of darkwave synth in there, you still get a lot of music that's off the beaten path, which I think is a great breath of fresh air and made the album really enjoyable to listen to for me personally. And then the last one is Barricades by Principe Valiente. This is an absolute killer album. Super dreamy, kind of Disintegration reminiscent Cure era of swirly post-punk. To me, it just felt like I stepped into an 80s club. It's absolutely wild, and I loved every second of this album. I haven't heard something quite like this in a long time, which is why I think I loved it so much. And I think it's even better than their previous material, which I already liked. It's dripping with atmosphere, and it transports you to that smoke-filled hallway with bisexual lighting that smells like hairspray and cloves. There's they do some interesting things as well. It doesn't really have that sort of samey feel throughout the album. There's a couple tracks that have this sort of transcendent kind of church choir vibe to them. I don't know if it's like the chord progression or the song structure that gave me that feeling of kind of, you know, the church choir thing. But they don't just stick to swirly post-punk. They do some other interesting things on the album. And then in the second half, there are a couple songs that have more of a shoegazy feel to them as well. But yeah, it's all killer, no filler. Definitely recommend checking that out. And that is it for my Sinister Suggestions this month. As mentioned at the beginning of the show, it is now time to continue our celebration of the micromedia of goth culture, specifically that of the zine. And to do that, we have a special guest who will be reading selected portions of, well, I'll let them introduce themselves. They've gone to the trouble of doing that. And following that will be a dramatic reading of the Tao of Goth, which comes from Count von Sexbat, who you may know from the 90s. They were quite prolific in the output they produced for webzines and alt-gothic, a DJ as well, among many other trades. The Tao of Goth is probably one of the more well-known pieces they put together, though certainly not the only one, and was actually printed in an issue of Meltdown magazine in 2004 as well. So without further ado, I present Ryan Flint.
Hello, Cemetery Confessions listeners. This is Ryan Flint with Witchhands. Not long ago, I came into possession of an old fanzine called Gotham Issue Number 2, thanks to my delightful partner in crime, LaShonda. It's from approximately 1992 to 1993. It's purple, about the size of a paperback book, maybe a little bigger. appears to be mimeographed or photocopied with all the flaws in the graphics and text that you would expect from analog. It very much has the feel of holding a handmade flyer somebody made late night by cutting and pasting a bunch of things. It's very cool. I don't know if you'd say there's waves or generations of the goth movement or something that this is a representation of, but it very much seems like it comes from a place and time where goth is a thing, they call it goth, it has a culture and a club and a canon, and a lot of the people that we think of as maybe the Mount Rushmore of goth are a bunch of sellouts. Very snarky, very gatekeepery, very elitist. And yet, in true Gen Xer fashion, fails to fully take itself so seriously, except when it does. Oh my God, is it so serious? Music reviews. Deafening Divinities Volume 2. 2-volume LP. This is a Beggar's Banquet compilation showcasing their signed bands' upcoming releases. I won't mention most of the bands since they are of no interest to me and shouldn't be to you. The 3 bands which you'd probably be interested in are Love and Rockets, Terminal Power Company, and the Nephilim. Let us start with Love and Rockets and This Heaven, a brand spanking new track from these great sarcasm, goth psychedelic pretenders. Always a spotty band, though they did have their moments. All was completely lost after Earth, Sun, Moon. Beats me why they continue flogging about. And worse even, as solo artists, Daniel Ash and David J. are bland and as dry and stale as bread molding. As for Kevin Haskins, who really ever cared anyway? You Bauhaus fans should also stop with your ridiculous icon worshipping. They're dead, dead, dead! Get over it! Back to This Heaven. A look-see into what the next L&R album, to be released in 1994, is basically going to sound like. And like most no-balls sellout bands, Love and Rockets have decided to follow the herd over the perilous trendy cliff. The same cliff, all about Eve, and the mission perished over. This Heaven has a strong, mellow, manic Manchester house feel, a la Happy Mondays and the like, so obviously this is shit. But I need not tell you, you expected it, didn't you? I did. This is supposed to be L&R's last album. Good riddance. I first heard Terminal Power Company on Mick Mercer's gothic rock album. They did this interesting goth-type dance song called Burning Chrome, which was a bit baffling. Here they are again, this time with Splintered Spish. And I'm baffled again. I think it's the keys that keep throwing me off. They're interestingly dark and work well with the guitar jeering, and I think I like them. Just haven't figured them out yet. They have a couple of CDs and EPs out if you're intrigued. Last, the only reason I bought this damn album, The Nephilim. The song is rough mixed demo versions of Chaocracy from Carl's Phoenix to Nephilim. The liner notes say this is a strong indication of things to come. Where should I start? Well, I practically went into shock. I sat there with my mouth open and my heart twisting tightly. I couldn't believe what I was listening to. I heard the new stuff and it was going to be strong, but no one told me it was going to be horror metal. I found myself remembering the Cult as they metamorphosized into the joke that they are. By the way, Craig Adams, formerly of The Mission, has joined the Cult. Now, here's my favorite band, the Nephilim, sticking it to me as the Cult once did. After my initial shock, I realized that I love this song. So much I can forgive the horrendous guitar solo. Die-hard Neph fans, as I did, might have reservations about this at first, but just listen carefully and you'll see that the spirit is alive and well in the new Nephilim. It is, as was undeniably Carl McCoy, the name of the song is chaocracy, and it's just that. Total anger and havoc unleashed. The song can be summed up into one word. Powerful! Carl's vocals and the lyrics are, as always, gutturally wonderful. The sheer might and the song manages to shove down your throat, in a good way, is electrifying. Let us pray the reason for the extreme delay in the Nephilim album is because Carl's gone back and made some changes, i.e. the guitar solo on Chaocracy. After all, this is a rough demo song, fingers crossed in keeping the faith. And for those of you who missed the old Nephilim, the best of double CD compilation Fields of the Nephilim entitled Revelations has been released as well. Nosferatu interview. The following interview with Vlad Janicek of ultra-campy B-goth band Nosferatu was conducted by Carlos Vampiro Enriquez in the year of our Lord something or other, blah, 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 blah.
Has Louis left the band?
We have changed our vocalist and as a result have been working hard to sort everything out. We are writing new material and have a new single scheduled for release in November in the UK.
What's the current lineup?
Myself, bass, keys, Damien DeVille, lead and rhythm guitar, and Niall Masters, vocals.
Sapphire Aurora, editor of Grimoire, used to handle vocals, but no more. Why?
This is a well-trodden question, but the usual answer is she didn't feel a passion for live performance and wasn't committed to the pressure to perform, and basically wanted different elements in her life. Art, poetry, jewelry.
Whatever became of Incubus? Stupid named. Your old vocalist before Louis.
We lost touch, I'm glad to say.
What do you see in store for Goth?
I would like to see more unity and less one-upsmanship.
Can we just get along, editor?
There are too many snobs and posers who can't see further than the mirror. Vampires aren't supposed to have reflections, but most of them are too busy looking at themselves in the mirror. There is a lot of potential in the scene, but it seems that once a person has been in the scene a while, they either A, lose interest, or B, become super goths and drop the usual, I was there at Albert Hall in 1985 superiority bullshit and reckon things were better then. In the UK, there is a healthy interest, except on behalf of the business side, where record companies continue their indifference.
What bands do you like? What bands have influenced you?
I like Love Like Blood, Rosetta Stone, some Marionettes. Bands that have influenced us: The Cult, The Cure, Sisters, Mission, Nephilim, Bauhaus, Specimen, Susie, Jethro Tull, Metallica, Ozzy Osbourne, Wasp, All About Eve, The Damned, Alice Cooper, David Bowie.
What else influences you, besides music?
Art. The lack of interest in goth by the press, films, literature.
Anything new forthcoming?
There will be a CD compilation soon on Cleopatra called Legend, a collection of B-sides, remixes, and cassette-only tracks from the first 4 singles.
How important is your image?
The image cannot be divorced from the music, and our attitude is this. We are a gothic rock band, because that's what suits us best. Take us as we are. If you don't enjoy what we do, then sorry. That is your hang-up, not ours.
Who is the pictured diva on the diva sleeve?
She is from a collection of engravings that I have acquired over a period of time.
Have you toured in support of Rise?
Yes, and it was an eventful tour with its usual share of highs and lows, mostly enjoyable.
What can be expected at a Nosferatu show?
We have a few tricks in the show, but the scale and depth are not as great as we would like.
I thought you were supposed to come over to the States.
We would have been over in October if it had not been for the greed of the Phantom Courts, who we were to come over with. After introducing them to an agency as a favor, they proceeded to ask for so much that we got dropped from the bill, as the agent, quote, ran out of funds. So we can't say when we will be over. If this bothers enough people, then I suggest they contact Brian at Cleopatra, as this might make him pull his finger out.
Anything else?
Yes. To all those in the U.S. who have supported us so far, thank you from the heart, and we will never disappoint you. To those who would stand in our way, fuck you.
The Tao of Goth. Translated and transcribed by Count von Sexpat. The Tao of Goth was discovered in an archaeological dig under a basement in Westbourne Grove, London, about 10 years ago. It was written in a mixture of ancient Chinese, a little-known Visigothic dialect, and West Mercian Anglo-Saxon. After many years guessing what the bits in Chinese might mean, Take a Bite is proud to present the first publication of the English translation. Book 1. Crimping from Chaos. 1.1. And the Dark Lord spoke. Without words, Goth, like the Tao, can be experienced, and without a name it can be known. It's just convenient for us to have mutually agreed on terminology, so please stop hassling me, or I will write a poem at you. In the beginning, there was chaos. Spawned in the void, it had nowhere to go on a Saturday night, so it remained still, or possibly hung around graveyards until it was old enough to drink. It is the source of all things Goth. I do not know its name, as I was not there, so we will call it the Tao of Goth, for if we don't, the entire premise is lost. When Goths are at play, there is harmony in the world. The Tao of Goth flies far and wide and comes back in the morning with runny makeup and a hangover. 1.2. To conduct one's life according to the Tao of Goth is to conduct one's life without regrets, without confusing it with other ways in which an individual might choose to live. The Tao begot Romanticism. Romanticism begot modernism, and so on and so forth. This is all in the Principia Diabolicus. Suffice it to say that here we are, and somewhere along the line coal begot black eyeliner. Each subculture has its purpose, however humble. Each expresses the yin and yang. But do not be a crusty if you can avoid it. 1.3. In the beginning was the Tao. The Tao gave birth to time and snakebite. Therefore, time and snakebite are the yin and yang of Goth. Goths that do not know the Tao are always running out of time and snakebite. Goths that know the Tao always have enough time to get ready and enough snakebite to get drunk as a bee. How could it be otherwise? 1.4. The new Goth is told about the Tao and ignores it. The average Goth is told about the Tao and searches for it. The old Goth is told about the Tao and giggles at it. If it were not for laughter, there would be no Tao. Without the Tao, the highest sounds are the hardest to hear, unless the amps are cranked up to 10. Going forward is a way to retreat. Greater talent shows itself late in life. Even the Dark Lord has bad hair days. Book 2, Combing Back the Void. 2.1. And the Dark Lord thought for a while, and added, That which one perceives as beautiful is beautiful compared with that which is lacking beauty. This is why we have mirrors. The Knights of the Living Dead were mysterious and profound. We are unable to follow their thought processes, so we'll describe what they looked like. Aware, like outside the fox on a Saturday night crossing the road. Opaque, like black pools in darkened caves, apart from their faces, which were like clouds. Who can tell the mystery of their thoughts, or the dark secrets of their hearts? The answer exists only in the Tao. 2.2. The Dark Lord once dreamed that he was a bat. When he awoke, he exclaimed, I do not know whether I am the Dark Lord who dreamed I was a bat, or a bat dreaming that I am the Dark Lord. Shortly afterwards, he issued an edict which read, quite simply, Do not eat cheese and drink port before bed. Although the dance of dreams is at one with the Tao, there is no sense in courting weirdness if you are not awake to appreciate it. This is the first lesson of the Tao of Goth. You should study it well. 2.3. One thing is high because another thing is low. Only when the music stops do we stop dancing. And that which leads is seen to lead only by being followed. A provincial Goth once went clubbing in the city. When he returned, he commented to his friends, saying, What sort of Goths do they think they were? They laughed out loud and enjoyed themselves. Their hair had not been dyed for many weeks, and they wore T-shirts with funny logos. They giggled at me when I told them they had got it wrong, and they made rude noises during my impromptu poetry reading on the stairs. One of the friends, who was wiser and more arch, said, You should not have gone to the city. Those Goths live in a different world. They consider life absurd and frolic in the dark beauty of destruction. They come and go without knowing limitations. Without a care, they live only for their own enjoyment. They are live within the Tao. 2.4. The person who possesses many things, but does not boast of his possessions, reduces temptation and reduces stealing. Please, may I have my X-Mile bootlegs back? A mini-Goth in days of old once asked the Dark Lord, Here is a Goth that no longer has to be the center of attention and doesn't drink snakebite until she falls over. Yet all who know her consider her one of the hardest Goths in the world. Why is this? The Dark Lord replies, That Goth has mastered the Tao. She has gone beyond the need for showing off. She does not become angry when her hair does not stand up, but accepts the universe without concern.
She has gone beyond the need for hairspray. She no longer cares if anyone else sees her as an paragon of beauty. She has gone beyond the need for that. Each of her outfits are perfect within themselves, serene and elegant, their purpose self-evident. Truly, she has entered the mystery of the Tao.
Book 3. The Secret Wisdom of Aquanet. 3.1. One day the Dark Lord was out for a drink with his mates and said,
"It is the nature of the Tao that even though used continuously, it is replenished naturally, never being emptied and never being overfilled. But that aside, it's your round."
One day, a member of another subculture approached Wolfstand and his warband and said,
"Oi, Gothic! Oi, Morticia! Oi, Gothic sluts!"
And Wolfstand said,
"Does anyone here have heels on? Good. We can leg it."
This is the second lesson of the Tao of Goth. You should study it well. 3.2. Wolfstand the Sage once said to the Dark Lord,
"When living by the Tao, awareness of self is not required, for in this way of life the self exists, and is also non-existent, being conceived of not as an existentiality, nor as non-existent. This means you do not have to pay rent."
There once was an old Goth who wore a faded Bauhaus t-shirt. A novice, seeking to imitate him, purchased a similar t-shirt, washed it until it began to fade, and also began to wear it to clubs and such. When the novice and his friends asked the old Goth why he was not dancing to Bela Lugosi's Dead, the old Goth enlightened him, saying,
"What is appropriate for the master is not appropriate for the novice. You must understand the Tao before wearing a Bauhaus t-shirt. Besides, I am too old for this lark, and I need a sit-down and have some central nervous system stimulants. I am not as young as I used to be. We didn't fight the punk wars just so you could dance to Bauhaus. I remember seeing them play at the old dance hall on Market Street back in '79.
And the novice learnt that you should never get an old Goth started on bands that split up before you were born, or they will go on all night and follow you home if necessary. This is not the Tao. This is just something they will do because they take a perverse pleasure out of it. 3.2. Great good is said to be like snakebite, sustaining life with a nice flavor, flowing freely, providing nourishment in all the major food groups, and it is found in places which desiring man rejects. In this way, it is like the Tao itself. And in another way, it isn't, as the Tao is less likely to encourage you to climb lampposts to pick flowers. 3.3. There was once a Goth who was attached to the court of the warlord Alaric. The warlord asked the Goth, "Which is easier to do, a mohawk or a My Little Pony haircut?" "A mohawk," replied the Goth. The warlord uttered an exclamation of disbelief. "Ha! Surely a mohawk is trivial next to the complexity of all those hair extensions and plaits and scarves," he said. "Not so," said the Goth. "When doing a pony style, one is conforming to a known image. The stylist knows what the finished product must look like, and only has to decide on a color scheme. By contrast, a mohawk transcends structure. It is held up by a force of will, by faith in hairspray, by the permission of the elements. When doing a hawk, the Goth seeks the simplest harmony between hair and gravity. This
is why it is easier to look like a My Little Pony than have a mohawk. The warlord Alaric nodded and smiled. That is all good and well, but which is easier to wash out? The Goth made no reply. 3.4 The Dark Lord turned to the Count one day and said, He who seeks titles invites his own downfall. And then they both had a good laugh about it. A Goth once visited a Knight of the Living Dead and told him that he was going to start a band. The Goth asked the Knight, How long will it take the four of us to think of a name? It will take 1 month, said the Knight promptly. But we need a name immediately, as we have a gig on Saturday, and we must prepare humorous t-shirt merchandise. How long will it take if I ask my friends to help? The Knight frowned. In that case, it will take 2 months. And what if I ask on the internet? The Knight of the Living Dead smiled. Then the name will never be chosen, he said. Thus the Goth was illuminated, and went away and made up the name by himself. Book 4. The Names of People Who Live in the City, a.k.a. the Phone Book. 4.1 Thus spake the Dark Lord. The pint is easier to hold when it is not filled to overflowing. The blade is more effective if you don't try to sharpen it with a nail file. Silver and leather are easier to protect if possessed in moderation. But that's hardly the point, as it is my birthday. A novice once asked the Dark Lord what was the sound of one hand clapping. Nosferatu live, replied the Dark Lord, and carried on doing his eye makeup. 4.2 One day, Eloise turned to one of her minions and said, See that wiggly puddle over there? That's your eyeliner, that is. That's how you do your eyes when you are really trying hard to look good. Makeup should be light and agile, its foundation blended like pearls. The spirit and intent of the cheekbones should be retained throughout. There should be neither too little nor too much, neither needless loops nor useless swirls, neither lack of structure nor overwhelming rigidity. Makeup should follow the law of least astonishment. What is this law? It is simply that the makeup should always be applied by the user in the way that astonishes him least. Makeup, no matter how complex, should act as a single unit. The application should be directed by the logic within, rather than by outward appearances. If the makeup fails in these requirements, it will be in a state of disorder and confusion. The only way to correct this is to wash it off and start again. This is why you should always get ready before you get drunk. You should study this well until it is second nature. 4.3 One day, Wulfstan got the wrong end of the stick and commented, It is not the way the Rizlas stick together which gives the pot its usefulness, but the space within the shape from which the pot is made. A novice asked the master, Sometimes I go out and I have a good time and get shocked a lot, and sometimes I come home lonely and miserable. I have followed all the rules and social conventions, and I am totally baffled. What is the reason for this? The master replied, You are confused because you do not understand the Tao. Only a fool expects rational behavior from his fellow humans. Why do you expect it from humans that try to look like corpses and mix cider and beer? Only the Tao is perfect. The rules of social intercourse are transitory. Only the Tao is eternal. Therefore you must contemplate the Tao before you receive enlightenment.
But how will I know when I have received enlightenment? Asked the novice.
You'll get off with someone in the corner, replied the master. 4.4 Wulfstan was explaining the nature of the Tao to one of his minions.
The Tao is embodied in all music, regardless of how insignificant, said the master.
Is the Tao in the music of Alien Sex Fiend? Asked the novice.
It is, came the reply.
Is the Tao on the CDs by Rosetta Stone? Continued the novice.
It is even there, said the master.
And can the Tao be heard in the later albums of the Mission?
The master coughed and shifted his position slightly. The lesson is over for today, he said.
Book 5 Cleaning the Dark Mirror 5.1 One of the Dark Lord's knights was dancing the 3x3, her feet moving 3 steps forward and 3 steps back as her arms flew like snakes through the air. The dance was in perfect time and as graceful as sunlight on a raven's wing.
Excellent, Alaric exclaimed. Your technique is faultless.
Technique, said the knight, without breaking her step. What I follow is the Tao, beyond all technique. When I first began to dance, I would see before me the whole dance floor as a mass of black-clad seaweed. After 3 years, I no longer saw this mass. Instead, I saw the gaps between the people. But now I see nothing. My whole being exists in a formless void. My senses are idle. My spirit, free to work without instruction, follows its own instinct. In short, my dance dances itself. True, sometimes there are people in the way. I see them coming. I slow to another rhythm. I watch silently. Then I twist slightly from the hips, and they stumble past me and vanish like puffs of idle smoke. And when the music finishes, I close my eyes for a moment, and then walk off the dance floor if I don't like the next track.
Alaric said, Would that all of my friends were as wise.
5.2 Thus spake the Dark Lord.
After 3 days without coffee, life becomes meaningless.
Without a door, the room cannot be entered, and without windows, it is dark. Remember the door when designing a room. The Knight of the Living Dead cleans the dark mirror of his mind, so that it reflects without intent. He cultivates without possessing, thus providing nourishment. Book 6 Kicking Out Time 6.1 The Goth is often envied because others do not know that although he is nourished by the Tao, like them, he too is mortal. When he too forgets this fact, he becomes a parody of himself, who no longer gets the joke, and the Tao is lost to him. You should study this well. 6.2 Thus spake the Dark Lord.
Closing time! Go on, get lost! Haven't you got homes to go to? If you're not out of here in 30 seconds, I'm going to use the CS gas!
What incredible performances from Ryan and Trey. Once again, don't forget to check out Ryan's band Witchhands on Bandcamp and Spotify. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Thank you both so much for contributing those pieces to our celebration of goth magazines on this month's episode. And also, of course, thank you to the writers of those pieces, of which the dramatic readings belong to. This whole episode, of course, is about celebrating the hard work and dedication that goes into producing these kinds of projects. Without the sacrifices and the passion and the creativity of incredible people in the scene, we wouldn't have these works of art that stand the test of time. So, of course, thanks to those folks as well. If you enjoyed this, because I sure as fuck did, and I know Ryan and Trey did, Ryan went so far as to record dramatic readings of more portions of the Gotham fanzine. And I'm going to be uploading sections of that to the Patreon page. So there is already one post uploaded to Patreon, and I'll be posting more of these to the Patreon page throughout May. So if you would like to check those out, you can go to patreon.com/cemeteryconfessions. And if you have never been to our Patreon page before and never signed up, go ahead and take a look and see what else you can get, because we have a whole back catalog of content, from exclusive videos that you can only view on Patreon, like videos of Trey, myself, and some of our friends locked in a cemetery, videos of going to clubs, a day in the life video, and videos sort of just doing deep dives into specific subjects. There are audio only podcast style posts, live stream videos that we had done a couple years ago. You'll get early access to podcast episodes. We've got riff tracks where the Gothquisition watches films that you can watch along with us and makes fun of them. And then you can get access to other things like merch sent to your house, stuff like that. So, and of course, just a reminder, there is a new design by the indomitable Ryan Flint that is available now on Teespring. So the link to that is in the notes of this episode. So you can just kind of scroll down and take a look where all the references would be, the timestamp, the description of the episode, and there will be a link to take a look. There's a few different types of shirts, different sizes, different cuts and fits, and there's some other types of things. There's like a pillow and travel mug and a poster. There's a few different, couple different colors for the design that Ryan created. Really fucking cool design. So that's going to be available from May 1st until the end of May. And then that's going to go back into the vault. Next month, we will be back with Jose Hernandez Cruz, who is a professor and researcher of humanities in Mexico with a focus on rock music history and often post-punk pop culture, and sort of he's also the curator of the Rock Music Repository, which seeks to preserve Mexican rock history. So we're going to be talking about the history of post-punk and goth rock in Mexico, the cultural, political, regional influences of goth, the sort of semantic, semiotic, and sociological frameworks through which we can view subcultural identity and community within the Mexican goth and post-punk and alternative scene. So I think that'll be another fantastic episode. Thank you so much for spending your time with us here at Cemetery Confessions. It really means a lot just that you are here at the end of the episode and that you spent time with us. And it really, really means a lot that those of you who support us on Patreon continue to support us, because, like I always say, none of this would have happened without you. You are part of that web of contributors and scenesters that make everything we have possible, right? Whether it's this podcast or the various endeavors and projects that happen around the internet. And many of you that do support us on Patreon also have your own projects and endeavors to contribute to and give back to the scene. And I'm so honored to just be part of that, to be able to contribute and give back in that way. And the fact that you all support this show financially so that we can do that, so that we can provide this place to foster community and thought and support and empower the people that make the goth community, that are so passionate about building these connections and making this funeral procession of ours as whimsical, snarky, and romantic as it is. So thank you all for the support. And until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of The Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.